Anyways, hey, again, I think we're recording now. If not, let me click on the record button. Yes, we are. Okay. So again, the U.S. was officially neutral during World War I for most of the war. It's a 4-year war. We're only involved in it for one actively. All right? Even though we were harassed by British and German ships, mostly German. We weren't really harassed much by Britain, at least militarily. They did pressure us to try to join, but they weren't sinking our ships. Alrighty? What does cause us to enter the war, if you remember? Unconditional submarine warfare, right? Remember when the Germans start to sink American ships again after they had previously promised they wouldn't? Eventually Wilson says enough is enough, and we are going to ask for a declaration of war. Alright? Now, what had led up to that? Remember, while we were neutral, the Lusitania was sunk. Remember, that was a British passenger ship, but it had a bunch of Americans on board. American lives were lost, and 128, in fact. And it turned public opinion against Germany. Up until that point, we were strongly neutral, but were moved towards the British side and away from the German side after the sinking of the Lusitania.
Well, that's not an immediate cause.
Not an immediate cause whatsoever. What's that? Yeah, 2 years before, more of a general cause. I think the Lusitania incident pushes us on the road towards declaration. And then remember the Sussex Pledge. Again, this is before we declare war. Germany actually agreed to stop the unconditional submarine warfare if we would get the British to lift their blockade of Germany. When we were ultimately unsuccessful, eventually the Germans go back to sinking American ships again. Of course, let's not forget about the Zimmerman note. Remember, that really riled up the American public when Germany contacted Mexico to see if they were interested in an alliance. Remember, the Mexicans never took it seriously, but the U.S. public did. They thought it was outrageous that Germany would be plotting behind our backs. Ultimately, it's a small cause. The big one, again, is unrestricted submarine warfare. When the Germans go back to it in 1917, and those U-boats start sinking American ships, then we declare that war. Wilson asks for and receives that declaration. All right? Remember, Wilson tried to sell the war to the American public because he knew they were skeptical. Even after the Lusitania, even after unconditional submarine warfare, Wilson knows the American public is isolationist. We have this long history of it, right? And so he needs to convince them it's worthwhile to fight this war. Remember? He doesn't say, hey, we're going to fight war to win territory, all right? He says, hey, we're going to make the world safe for democracy, all right? We're going to help other democracies out there. This is a war to end all wars and to maintain or guarantee democracy and freedom moving forward, all right? Of course, please remember, even though he sold that to the American public, later on a lot of Americans argued that wasn't the case, that they had been lied to. If you remember, during the 30s, the Creel Committee, the Creel Committee's job was to sell it to the public. You know, they would use Hollywood stars, silent movie actors, right? They would, remember, use the propaganda, meatless Mondays, wheatless Wednesdays, right? How can you conserve, right? Voluntary conservation. How can you conserve resources that we need for the war? Give up alcohol, right? Is a good example of that. Yes?
Doesn't Truman do similar stuff to that, too?
Truman?
Truman later on.
FDR does. Is that what you're talking about? Like during World War II?
Yeah. Well, I thought... Never mind.
Okay, because, hey, yes, we do more of that in World War II. But remember that in World War II it was required that you ration. This was all voluntary in World War I. All right? Anyways, let's remember the 14 points as well. That is Wilson's plan to end World War I. Obviously, it's very idealistic, all right? It's kind of like a perfect solution. Yeah, utopian solution to all the problems in the world. He thinks it's realistic that we can achieve it. Obviously, when we get to the Treaty of Versailles, we find out the rest of the world isn't interested as much in his 14 points, or at least Britain and France are. Remember, freedom of the seas. Everybody should be allowed to have their ships travel wherever without worry, without being intercepted or without being sunk. Obviously, that is a direct reference to what had happened with American ships that had been sunk by German U-boats. All right? Self-determination for large ethnic minorities. Remember, he wants to redraw the map of Europe after the war and create new countries for ethnic minorities living under the control of the Germans or the Austrians or the Russians. All right? Remember, he wants to reduce armaments, right? He wants to reduce, arms races lead to war, he believes. That's what had happened in World War I, if you remember. And so let's reduce our arms. Create an international collective security organization through a group, everybody involved working together, we're going to collectively be able to prevent wars from breaking out and enforce peace. This does become the League, we know, but of course we know the U.S. never signs. During the war, mobilization. To be quite honest with you, folks, we're only in the war for about a year, so most of these programs are good ideas, but not really successful because the war ends before we're really able to implement them. Definitely the first one. The War Industries Board, remember this was going to coordinate all of our resources and production. If we needed this type of resource, for instance oil, it would coordinate and organize and say, hey, you guys are going to be focusing on oil production. Again, it would have completely controlled all wartime production. It never really was implemented because it took a while to put into effect and the war ended before it could be. It is a model that is used for the New Deal and World War II, however, when we get to those events. Conscription, remember as a draft, we do have a draft during World War I. Please remember, unlike the Civil War, you could not pay for a replacement, all right? That was the major difference, obviously, because those sorts of policies tended to benefit middle and upper class Americans at the expense of the poor, all right? Remember the war bonds? They were called Liberty Loans, all right, during this war. You were encouraged to purchase war bonds, which meant obviously you gave the government money that you had in exchange for a future payment back once the war was over. Remember, lots of pressure to buy these bonds, these Liberty Loans, or these Liberty Bonds, particularly amongst German Americans, if you remember, who had to show their loyalty during the war, even more than other groups. Herbert Hoover, remember, becomes kind of a household name during this era. He ran the Food Administration.
Mr. Harlan, please call extension 25780. Mr. Harlan, please call extension 25780.
We're having a band calamity somewhere on campus. Anyways, Herbert Hoover in charge of the Food Administration. Guys, remember, they were the ones whose job it was to organize all of this rationing, all this conservation. Remember, it was all voluntary during World War I. But there was tremendous pressure to show to your neighbors or to your community just how much you were supporting the war effort, all right? The War Labor Board, remember, it was designed to reduce labor disputes. It was trying to prevent strikes, right? So its job is to mediate arguments between workers and businesses so that we don't have strikes break out instead. Despite their best efforts, remember, there were 6,000 strikes during World War I, almost all of them organized by the Wobblies, by the Communist Party, all right? Women's role in the war increases mightily, not as much as World War II, but a major step. Factory work for many women, especially wartime work. Also, many women tended farms, they tended businesses, while men were overseas fighting. Please remember, the role of women during World War I is a major reason why Wilson changes his position on suffrage and begins to support it after the war is over. All right? Dissent. Hey, there were a lot of dissenters. Somebody asked me the other day, what is dissent? Remember, that's where you disagree. Huh?
Aren't they deserters?
No, a dissenter just disagrees, all right? So a dissenter just disagrees. Now, a lot of times people who dissent radically will desert or not show up if they're called to service, all right? But if you dissent, that just means you disagree with the majority. Remember, there were about 350,000 draft dodgers. They just didn't show up to be drafted when they were called. That is technically a crime, but it's rarely actually enforced. Rarely do they send people to prison for that, I will tell you that. Did somebody just say good? Oh, yeah. I'll knock your ass out, Victor. All right, because I put him on the front lines. Anyways, put him in his little short shorts on the front line. All righty. Anyway. Many strikes. I told you about 6,000 of them. If I'm not mistaken, they're very cute little red Marina shorts. Am I right there, Victor?
Yeah.
Anyways, yes. Anyway, 6,000 strikes, a lot of inflation during the war, so prices go way up. So despite the government's best efforts, they're really unable to stop the strikes during World War I. They do a much better job during World War II. Remember, we passed these kind of questionable laws, the Espionage Act, remember, and the Sedition Act was used to crack down on opposition during the war. Remember, sedition is when you talk bad about your government, which we kind of value. We think that's generally a good thing, freedom of speech. During the war, they thought that that was helping the enemies, and so remember, they banned it, they restricted it. If you recall, couldn't talk bad about the president, you couldn't talk bad about the uniform, the flag, the freaking uniform, all right? You couldn't be like, hey, I think American soldiers' uniforms are ugly, which, oh, by the way, they were. Or you could, in theory, be thrown in jail for doing so, all right? Because you were un-American for saying that, all right? Yeah.
Ban someone's opinion though.
It's a temporary deal, so during times of...
How do you know if they said it or not?
Usually it would have to be some sort of public statement, and they would have trials and things like that, where they would have witnesses come in and say, yeah, he said this. A lot of times these guys didn't deny it, because they thought they were protected by freedom of speech, and so they wanted to kind of be arrested for this so they could challenge it in the courts. All right? Yeah.
Were some of these policies kind of like socialistic, like even the war industry's model?
Yeah. Yeah, oh, totally. This is our first real example of socialism, I think. Because government, and if you remember, during the war, government actually took over railroads and things like that for a few months. Yes. So I think during times of extreme crisis, yes, methods that we generally would frown upon.
Almost like martial law?
Yes, exactly right. All right, exactly right. Let's remember, for instance, that, during World War II, Japanese internment removal was widely supported by the population. All right? Anyways, the Espionage Act said, again, if you criticized the war effort, or if you gave speeches that encouraged people not to sign up for the draft, or not to enlist on their own, then you could actually be viewed as somebody that was assisting the enemies, and you could be arrested for that. Remember, it was primarily designed to arrest Wobblies, the IWW, the Communist Party in this country, and other socialists who were viewed as, one, pacifists, but two, not willing to support the war effort. Remember, these dudes challenged this case, this law, and in the case Schenck versus the United States, the Supreme Court actually backed the government and said, yeah, these dudes can be locked up for these statements. That during a time of crisis, like a World War situation, that you can be held by the government for violating those things. All right? They used the example of yelling fire in a crowded theater. All right? If you yell fire in a crowded theater, they said, and there's a stampede and poor Brenda gets trampled and dies because Mr. Majestic's got to save himself. All right? And the person who yelled fire, if they knew that it wasn't there really wasn't one, can be held responsible for that. Alrighty? And they said the same thing here. If this guy stands up and says anti-war statements, and then some other dude chooses not to sign up when he's supposed to, then the dude who originally told him can be held responsible for that. Alright? Please understand, these are policies that work during the war. They wouldn't apply after the war when there is a non-crisis situation. Okay? Remember, World War I was the biggest attack on civil rights in American history, at least since the Civil War. A lot of folks think up to that point in American history. Remember, there's incredible nativism both during and after the war in the 20s, especially by folks who were inspired by Wilson. He had used the term at one point, you need to be 100% American to support the war effort. And so, of course, nativists used that to argue that immigrants needed to assimilate and support in greater numbers. Please remember, the treaty that ends the war is the Treaty of Versailles. However, it's viewed as a major failure because, one, Wilson can't institute most of his points. Two, probably the bigger reason why it's a failure. What's up?
Sorry.
No, he got about 4 or 5 of them in there. All right. The bigger reason why it's a failure is because, remember, we never actually signed it. All right.
It wasn't because he didn't take the Republicans with him?
That's one of the reasons. All right. One of the reasons is, remember, he didn't bring Republicans with him over to the conference to negotiate the deal. All right. The bigger reason, remember, was that Republicans in Congress did not want to give up sovereignty. They did not want to give decision-making up to the League of Nations. They didn't want the League of Nations to force us into wars that, for instance, Congress didn't want to be a part of. All right? So the Senate viewed it as an unconstitutional thing that was taking power away from them, and so they struck it down. All right? So we do not join the League. We do not sign the treaty. We have to sign a separate treaty with Germany later, about a year after the war is over. Ultimately, again, it's a major failure. It leads to the rise of Hitler and Mussolini, and pushes us towards World War II. The impacts of World War I. One, the 19th Amendment is a direct effect of World War I. That's women's suffrage, right? Women's role during the war helped us to win it. We want to reward women for the major role they played after the war. Wilson is key in this. He switches his mind on suffrage, all right? Prohibition, another effect of the war. Remember, a lot of Americans just voluntarily gave up booze during this time. Better people than me. And so after the war, many of them just continued with this. There was greater support for prohibition after the war. Because a lot of people were like, oh, I went those years without alcohol, I guess I don't need it after all. All right? And then the Majewskis showed up. Great Migration is another effect of the war. The Great Migration is, remember, the movement of African Americans out of the South. Why? Because they're able to finally be able to move out of the South because there are jobs waiting for them in American cities in the North because white service members are overseas. Please remember, that is freaking awesome. It leads to the settlement of many cities by African Americans and vibrant African American communities in places like Harlem and Chicago and Detroit. The negative to that, please remember, when the white service members come back, there were also oftentimes race riots, clashes between them and the recently arrived African Americans who had quote-unquote taken their jobs. Alrighty? Yo.
Why would the Great Migration support Marcus Garvey?
Why would they? I think some do, to be honest with you. Not all members of the Great Migration do. But we're starting to see the very, very beginnings of emerging black nationalism. And I think that really has to do with the fact that African Americans are going into cities, getting higher paying jobs, and now that they're economically becoming more equal of some working class whites, they're going to want political and social equality as well. All right? And I think Garvey's message was powerful because, hey, just like Malcolm X before, or that comes after him, Garvey's point was Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, their strategies aren't changing things fast enough, right? So if you wanted more immediate results in terms of civil rights, Marcus Garvey's approach was better for you. It was more appealing to you because he promised more quick results, all right? Anyways, there was incredible inflation during the war. Remember, it's going to trigger a bunch of strikes after the war. There's a policeman strike. There's a general strike in Seattle. There's another railroad and steel worker strike. There's a miner strike after the war. Why? A lot of these industries had not gone on strike during the war. After the war, they expect to be rewarded. When they're not, they all go on strike together. The Red Scare, remember, it really occurs during and at the end of World War I, triggered by the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Remember, it's this fear of radicalism in this country. The most famous example, of course, were the Palmer raids, right, where A. Mitchell Palmer, right, our Attorney General, starts rounding up suspected communists and deporting them to Russia. All right, please remember, most of these folks were American citizens. Many of them did not have their due process respected, but because they were communists or suspected communists, apparently the Constitution didn't apply to them. All right, yeah. What's that? Dude, you want to know the worst part about it, man? We shipped them over there. And then in the 30s, when Stalin does all of those purges, who do you think were the very first people he wiped out? Those freaking Americans that had come here because he didn't think he could trust them. So almost all of those people get absolutely wiped out during the purges. Also, you know, all those dummies during the Great Depression that were like, hey, the Soviet Union's better than the U.S., I'm going to move to the Soviet Union. They all got wiped out a few years later, too. All right? USA! All right? Anyways. Be careful what you wish for, I guess, all right? Anyways, remember, why was there so much fear? Well, there's a fear, remember, that communism's inside the country, that anarchists and other radicals had infiltrated labor unions, and they were using labor unions in order to try to cause, turbulence, tension in the country, so that more people would embrace communism or another governmental system. Please remember the Red Summer, all right, which really is occurring during the Red Scare. Remember, this is the race riots. This is when the white veterans return after the war in 1919, and we got these massive clashes across the United States over economic jobs, over opportunity. Hey, we're going to have all this nativism after the war, and that's partly because of the war and who we were fighting against and the Red Scare. It's going to result, remember, the most extreme example are those immigration laws that restricted immigration entirely in this country, first in 21 and then the National Origins Act in 24. A lot of anti-German sentiment during the war, more and more anti-European sentiment in general as the 20s go on. Hey, let's appreciate this because it pretty much never happens. Farmers actually had success during World War I, all right? They didn't have any competition from European farmers. But The moment the war ended and Europe recovered, that's when American farmers go into the nosedive that they cannot seem to get out of. Alrighty? Hey, remember, the U.S. comes out of the war strong. We're not, Europe's devastated. We're the #1 creditor nation. We loaned the Allies all this money during the war. And of course, that leads to this incredible growth during the 20s. Please remember, Democrats and Wilson suffer defeats in 1920. Harding, the conservative, old guard conservative Republican, comes back. He promises normalcy, which we know means a return to isolationism, and the U.S. withdraws from international affairs again. Alrighty? Why? Because we're a little tired of progressivism. I know this is shocking for many of you to hear, but Americans were tired of sacrificing, all right, during the war. We were a little selfish, all right? We wanted to spend money. We wanted to enjoy ourselves. We thought that we had kind of gone through those eras long enough. First progressivism and then World War I, all right? It is considered the 20s, as we move into the 20s, the most conservative era after progressivism in World War I was one of the most liberal eras up to that point, all right? Nice little memory device here for you. Key parts of World War I, Red Scare, return to isolationism, nativism, volunteerism during the war, right? Migration, women, power, all right? Economic growth, you better believe it. Prohibition of alcohol, boo. Civil rights are violated, meh, no biggie. Oh, and millions of Americans fight in Europe, all right? Anyways, let's go to the 20s. All right, which is also Mr. Majewski's current age. Anyways, Americanism, all right? Americanism is the term that develops during the 1920s. It's the unique type of nativism that emerges after World War I. Can we not be, is everything all right over there? All right, it's a little better when you were laying down. Anyways, Americanism is this idea that we need to spread white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant values across this country, and others need to assimilate to become more like them. All right? Yeah, if any of you, by the way, on test day, right, and any of you, be careful. Be careful what you write on that test, all right? You don't want to be talking bad about Protestantism in any way, all right, when you're inside that house of worship, all right? You might have like a ceiling tile fall on your dome, all righty? And then you'll know, all right? And then you'll know, whoops, cross it out, Protestantism, good for America, all right? Anyways, the Red Scare, I already mentioned the Palmer raids. Remember, A. Mitchell Palmer, the Attorney General. If you remember what happens with Palmer, there's a bomb that goes off outside his house, right? And shocker, that kind of freaks him out, all right? And he's really angry that his family was there. And so he takes it out on the suspected radicals, communists, anarchists in this country who he believes are responsible for it. Again, here's the problem. We suspected some of these people were communists. We didn't really have proof. We deported them anyways. And a lot of anti-union sentiment during this era because unions are associated with radicalism, all right? So we have a lot of former union members that drop out because they don't want to be labeled a socialist or a radical. And we see efforts by the government to restrict the power of unions and to restrict worker rights. Anti-immigration, another effect of this nativism of the 20s. Remember, you really need to focus on this, the National Origins Act. There was an act that came a few years before it, but National Origins really just doubled down on what the previous act had done. It significantly reduced, remember, Eastern European immigration. It banned Asian immigration entirely. Remember, it established the quota system. And if you especially remember how, evil this law was, they didn't use the current census, if you remember, to establish how many people from Southern and Eastern Europe were here. They went back to an old census, 1890, so that they could let in even less on a yearly basis to determine the percentage that would get in. All right? Sacco and Vanzetti. Remember, these are the two Italian anarchist draft dodgers, right? Atheists, right? Anarchists, right? And guess what? Of course, they get convicted of murder based on questionable trial, questionable evidence. The judge was clearly biased against European immigrants, and so ultimately they are found guilty. They are executed. despite incredible protest, obviously in Italy, all around the world. But ultimately, they are executed for that crime. KKK. KKK, the reemergence of the Klan here in the 1920s. Again, now they're a nativist organization as opposed to just an anti-black organization. Remember, they opposed really any group that they consider to be associated with progressivism. Remember, women's rights, birth control advocates, Catholics, all right. They didn't particularly like educated folks, all right. So, hey, they really want us to return to almost a pre-Civil War, sort of pre-industrial society. This was a very popular organization at the time because nativism was so popular. 5 million people were members, including, remember, outside of the South, right? It grows into the North, it grows out West as well. It becomes a national organization before it dies down in popularity by the end of the 20s because of scandals that rocked its membership. All right? Remember one of the leaders of the KKK? You remember it was a sexual assault and then he supposedly murdered the girl. It was a lady, but and then remember they found out that they were taking dues money and the leaders of the organization were pocketing it for their own personal use. All right. Anyways. We also have this fight over kind of modernism, right? You have these traditional religious fundamentalists against modernists. The most famous example of that was the monkey trial, the Scopes monkey trial, remember? John Scopes, the teacher, tries to teach evolution in school. That is restricted by the state of Tennessee. He's arrested, he's got to pay a small fine. Ultimately, remember the ACLU and a guy named Clarence Darrow sue, arguing that Scopes should not have had to pay the fine. There's nothing wrong with teaching evolution since it's fact, he argues. And ultimately, even though Scopes loses that case, right? Remember, it becomes a major national news story. A lot of folks who watched, observers, believed actually that Darrow had gotten the better of the fundamentalists. If you remember, the fundamentalists were being represented by... Anybody remember who represented the fundamentalists during the Scopes trial?
Reagan.
It was a white guy? William Jennings Bryan. Yes, very good. Remember the loser from 1896? I hate to say that. Comes back in the 1920s and obviously kind of represents rural, traditional, conservative America. All right? Already mentioned Prohibition. Hey, Prohibition is partly a nativist law, right? It's a reflection of our desire to want to get immigrants to behave more like traditional Americans and restrict what we consider to be their extreme alcohol consumption. Hey, also during the 20s, it's the Roaring 20s, right? The economy roars, partly because of the post-war boom, partly because of some of those early trickle-down policies that gave a little bit of a spark to the economy. Remember, business was worshipped during this era. Businessmen were viewed almost as like leaders in society, kind of similar to today, I think. Remember, the most popular book at the time was the story of how Jesus was the world's first and best businessman. What did he sell? He sold his religion. Alrighty. The book was called The Man Nobody Knows. Alrighty. By a guy named Bruce Barton. Anyways, Henry Ford and the assembly line revolutionizes production, right? We massively reduce our costs, which means we can reduce prices for goods that previously were out of the reach of most Americans. Alright? Cars, obviously, is going to be the most famous example. We start to buy on credit during the 20s. Hey, guess what? We do the same thing again during the 50s, right? So the 20s and 50s are kind of linked together in that regard. Consumerism emerges. This is the first era where we're going to see things like catalogs for shopping. All right, we're going to see billboards. We're going to see advertisements like that in order to try to get Americans to consume products for their own personal wants or needs. Women become a major target for advertising. Advertising, which really hadn't existed before in large numbers, becomes a major industry. So do malls, so do department stores, all right? So do chain stores, right? Like Sears, all right, which was one of the very first. We start to see large corporate retail stores emerge. New industries, the movie industry, right? From silent movies to talking pictures by the end of the decade. Radio, right? Not only are you going to be able to communicate with news, also entertainment as well. Political messages in addition to that. Nothing more important probably than the automobile, right? Especially the Model T because it was so cheap and affordable. Most Americans were able to have a car for the first time during this era. The growth of the airplane, right? The airplane emerges during the early 1900s. It's used for war purposes during World War I. And it's used for commercial purposes beginning in the 1920s. Originally, they transported things like mail or a couple individual passengers. As time goes by, obviously, the airplane becomes more and more important. Synthetics, like plastics, start to emerge. Also, synthetic fibers that will replace cotton and wool. Those are good for the synthetic companies. They're bad for people growing the natural product. Just like how the airplane and the automobile are good for those companies, they're terrible for railroads, which suffered during this era. All right? Electric appliances, right? The blender, all right, is a new one. The alarm clock. I don't know if anybody should cheer the alarm clock, all right? But the alarm clock is a new invention during this era as well. What's that?
How do they know what time to
Cock-a-doodle-doo! No, I don't know, dude. It's a great question. Fortunately, Mr. M doesn't use an alarm clock most of the time. All right? I wake up and I'm just like, you know what? It's APUSH time. All right? Let's do it. All right? I jump out of bed. All right? I do. I get 2 inches of air. Anyways. Hey, sports for the first time develop. Professional sports. Remember, baseball becomes popular. The Yankees are the big team in this country, of course, right? Nativism. The boxing is a big sport, right? Remember, we get our first kind of sports superstars, Babe Ruth, and the famous boxer Jack Dempsey. All right. Hey, white-collar jobs emerge for the first time. Remember, these are considered professional or business jobs. The sort of job Ricky's not going to get unless he cuts his hair. All right? Anyways, sales jobs become very commonplace. All right? I am. Actually, I can just grab my wig and there will be twins. All right? Advertising becomes big business. More and more middle and upper class Americans move into these lines of work as they take up more and more of our economic growth. Management, we start to see the development of managers, people who are there to manage the other workers in the white-collar jobs. Also, this is the era of welfare capitalism. That's a funny word. Please don't confuse it with welfare programs from the New Deal or beyond. Remember, this is where businesses gave in to the demands of their workers. For instance, they would put up like gyms, all right, and other features in the workplace to try to improve the conditions for the workers so that they wouldn't have to, for instance, give things like higher wages, all right, or shorter work hours, all right? All of it was designed to reduce the influence of unions so people would be less willing to join unions during this time. Hey, we have a sexual revolution during the 20s, all right? Easy there, Sammy. A sexual revolution. All right, what is it based on? All right, it's based on Sigmund Freud. He, of course, he's got some interesting theories, all right? Now, as we are good at doing in this country, most Americans misunderstood the basic premise of Freud's theories. We interpret it that, hey, sexualization of society is a positive, is a good thing. And that's part of the reason why in the 20s women are really challenging sexual boundaries, barriers. I think that's kind of an indirect point of his, but I think that's a small part of his larger kind of theory. I don't really want to get into Freud's theory right now because we don't have the time for it. All right, and I don't. Yeah.
Say that the people were made up out of 3 sides.
Yes, he did. Yeah. So again, kind of the whole sexualization part is relatively small part of it. All right. Yeah, you better know it, right? Yeah. Well, then again, if they throw that question on there for you, that would be a gift. That'd be a softball, I think, right? Alice Paul, remember the ERA as well. Alice Paul is the member, the head of the Congressional Union, which is the radical women's group during the 20s. Remember, she's advocating for an equal rights amendment. She fails, of course. Please remember, the feminists like Betty Friedan in the 60s are going to pick up this idea and try to revive it again. And they come close to getting it passed. Margaret Sanger, birth control. Remember, she's advocating for birth control, She opens the first birth control clinic in this country. I remember she's handing out pamphlets and flyers, and she's getting arrested all the time for it because she's violating anti-sexuality laws by doing this. These were known as the Comstock laws that she was breaking. Flappers, of course, are another example of this emerging sexual revolution. They're challenging traditional styles of dress. Remember, in the 20s with flappers, skin was in. Of course, when we say that today, it's like shows a lot more skin than they were, alrighty? They were like, ooh, my elbow, alrighty? I'm challenging boundaries, alright? Please remember, women are gonna freak... I like you, don't you love it? Alright, anyways, easy over there, alrighty? I saw you getting excited, Josh, alright? Women, socially, are gonna start, hey, remember, women are gonna be entering the social environment more. Women are gonna start traveling more individually on their own. Women are gonna start learning to drive, for instance, which was like, whoa, what is into her, alright? She's trying to learn how to drive. They're going to speakeasies, they're smoking, they're drinking, they're cursing, you know, all of these things that, I don't know, that we love. Anyways, we see the increase in women in the workplace, right? Especially in white-collar jobs. Now, these are not normally the high-paying white-collar jobs. These are usually lower-level, secretarial, clerk, administrative assistant, at this particular time. Hey, also remember, divorce laws were made more favorable to women during this era. That's the stop booing. All right, that is a good thing. All right. What the hell happened to Deshala? All right. She just bailed, huh? All right. I thought she was gonna come back at some point. All right. Yeah, she said she'll come back in 5 minutes. Or like 5 minutes left in the review, and be like, wait, why am I not getting credit? All right, my backpack's been here the entire time. Anyways, American culture during the 20s. All right. The Jazz Age emerges during this era, especially in American cities like in Harlem, in New York City. We see the emergence of jazz. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington are great jazz musicians. Recent arrivals to the North through the Great Migration. Remember, it spurs this Harlem Renaissance, this incredible artistic explosion of African American work that emerges in Harlem and other cities across the United States. Direct effect of the Great Migration. Very much, again, tied together with Marcus Garvey, because his ideas about black self-reliance and black pride seemed to be taking place in many of these black urban neighborhoods like Harlem. Remember the famous poets? Hughes, Mr. M's favorite poet, by the way, in American history, Langston Hughes. What's that? Yeah, I didn't hear you.
The one that looks like a tree?
The one that looks like a tree?
Yeah.
I don't think he looks like a tree.
Which one looks like a tree?
I think you're talking about Walt Whitman when he was really, really old.
Would my friend Martinez, a 10th grader,
I get 10th grader.
either call your mother or come to the front office. Manuel Martinez, 10th grader, call your mother.
I'll call his mom.
Right, wow.
Fire ointment, please.
I know, right? I know. It's like, did you put on your acne medication today?
You forgot your ointment.
What's that?
Do you like my poetry though?
Do I like your poetry?
With
I was trying to put that out of my... Anyways, you need to know Hughes and Claude McKay and County Cullen and Nora Zeal Hurston. Hey, shh. You just need to recognize these as Harlem Renaissance writers. So if you get, hey, a passage, a stimulus from one of these sources, you immediately know, okay, this is a Harlem Renaissance source, all right? And you can kind of use the context to help you answer it. Remember Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, the most famous of the musicians, the jazz musicians. They perform at the Cotton Club, if you remember, in Harlem. And they had intentionally named it that kind of to poke fun at the fact, you know, that here they, look how far they had come since all they were used for in the United States had been to pick cotton. All right? Please remember, we also have this other literary movement during the 20s, the Lost Generation. These guys are the real downers, alrighty. Led by Fitzgerald, right, who criticized, obviously, the materialism, the wealth of the 1920s, and our obsession with obtaining it. Ernest Hemingway, critic of the war and the false promises, right, that had been made by Wilson and others. Remember, the Lost Generation was referring to the fact that an entire generation of men had been wiped out during the 20s. During World War I. And these were these people's friends, all right, and family members. And so they were really lamenting all of this hope and optimism that had resulted in all of this loss of life and very little positive results, all right? H.L. Mencken, Sinclair Lewis, also both criticized materialism, all right? In particular, Lewis does. Theodore Dreiser, William Faulkner criticizes the South. Gertrude Stein, she was actually the leader of this group. All these dudes looked up to her kind of as a leader. She actually lived in Paris. She's the one that actually came up with the name of the Lost Generation. Comments?
I was just saying Gertrude is such an ugly name.
That's the one from the Great Gatsby. No, it's
Myrtle, yeah. I find it, hey, you guys, you look at all these powerful authors. This is a who's who in many ways of the greats in American writing. And it makes me laugh that they all looked up to her as their idol and as their leader. She was also, she was one of the first openly lesbian women to kind of not have that affect her position within society. By the way, she moved to Paris in the 20s and never came back to the United States. She preferred Paris. And do you notice how all those dudes spent time in Paris or in Europe for periods of time? And how, for instance, Sun Also Rises and some of these other stories oftentimes focus on that area of Europe. Anyways, we got our icons, Charles Lindbergh, right? Remember the pilot? He's the first to cross the Atlantic. That's considered a major achievement. He becomes a hero in this country. Of course, Babe Ruth, right? The Sultan of Swat, the famous baseball player. All right?
Lindbergh advocated isolation.
He does during the 30s, you bet. He also, remember, had that weird situation where his baby got kidnapped and killed and held for ransom as well. It was like the great scandal of the early 30s. What happened to Lindbergh? Who stole Lindbergh's baby? All right? Yeah, it's not it. It's not really a APUSH question, alrighty, but it's just kind of a side story. Yeah, I probably can.
Are we going to get a short answer on the JFK conspiracy?
No you will not, alrighty, no you will not, alright. Huh?
Wait, was it that right, the Warren?
Yeah, the Warren Commission, well done. Anyways, conservative politics of the 20s. Shh. Remember, when we're talking about conservatives of the 20s, we're talking about high tariffs, anti-labor, laissez-faire, no regulation of business, and trickle down. Harding and then Coolidge and then Hoover. Remember, their belief is the job of government is to make business work, make it more profitable. They borrow the old conservative McKinley idea of how businesses thrived. They thrived without regulation and with help from the government. Tax cuts for the wealthy. It's going to trickle down to the rest of society. Remember, that was developed by the Secretary of Treasury, Andrew Mellon, at the time. Antitrust laws were not enforced during this time, so businesses were allowed to merge together and become stronger and more dominant. Businessmen, remember, were appointed to key positions within our government, all right? Kind of like today, where we had, right, the corporate leader, the guy from Exxon, be named our Secretary of State, even though he has absolutely no diplomatic experience prior to that. All right? To be honest with you, from what I understand, from what I've read about him, he's actually doing a pretty admirable job. All right, yeah. But anyways, a federal government did not help ordinary citizens. Remember, you didn't give government handouts. Otherwise, those poor people would stay permanently poor. They would always have their handout from the government. These conservatives believe.
Parties, not Parties.
What's up, bud?
Parties, right?
What about it?
The owner of Parties is the one that Trump's.
They're owned by the same parent company. Carl's Jr. owns Hardee's.
Oh,
yeah. In fact, in places where there are Carl's Jr.'s, there's not usually Hardee's, and vice versa. Alrighty. Anyways, federal government not responsible for helping ordinary citizens. They got to figure it out. Look to their family, look to their church, look to charities instead. Remember, these guys did not want mass infrastructure programs, especially in poor areas. They didn't really see the benefit. They didn't think government should be supporting these projects. They thought private businesses should. We do have a lot of scandal during the 20s because, of course, some of these businessmen try to keep profits for themselves. Let's get to the Depression, all right, which I think some of us may have been in a little longer. And the Great Depression, long-term causes. The weak international economy, all right? The economy is still struggling in the 20s around the rest of the world, especially in Europe. They're struggling to pay back some of those wartime debts. Weak industries in the U.S. Farming suffers in the 20s. Railroads suffer in the 20s. Why? Because of automobiles and airplanes. Cotton suffers because of all those synthetic industries. So key industries that we had depended on up to that point falter. Which is going to ultimately drag down all the rest of the economy as well. We're overproducing and we're underconsuming. Remember, we're making way more products than we can use, which is resulting in things like crop prices getting lower and lower and lower. We have an unstable banking system, which means that oftentimes banks engaged in what we would consider to be risky behavior. Oftentimes banks would have panics or would shut down during this era. And there's an uneven distribution of income. The wealthiest groups, right, control an incredibly disproportionate amount of the total wealth in the country, which meant the rest of society is not benefiting as equally from this growth of the 20s. The short-term cause was the stock market crash, right? That was the trigger by which the Depression really started to kick in. What are the results of the Depression? Well, depression. And 25% unemployment, sometimes even more in some places, right? Blacks, blue-collar workers were the most affected because their jobs were oftentimes the first to be cut, all right? Hoovervilles emerge. Remember these shanty towns that popped up all over the country, filled with hobos. Remember, people are going back and forth across the country looking for work, constantly traveling about. Families break up, marriages break up, suicides go way up, all right? Childbirth goes way down. 25% of the banks in this country fail in a couple of years. Businesses fail, farms fail, all right? Do your Chapter 31 guide for extra credit or some of you will fail. 25% of the farms, as I mentioned, falter, go under. On top of that, this is also the era where we're experiencing the Dust Bowl, that environmental calamity that is wiping out farms throughout the Midwest. And what are Hoover's responses? Not so aggressive, right? He's a little slow to react. Remember, he talks about how we need to volunteer, we need to support charities more to help out our fellow Americans. His biggest program to try to fight the Depression was the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Even then, because of his ideology, we give $500 million to try to improve circumstances in this country. Remember, who did he give it to? He gave it to banks, and he gave it to big businesses, because he thought that would be the best way to help as many people as possible in this country. The most famous example of dissent against Hoover, of course, is the Bonus Army. Remember those veterans from World War I, March on Washington. They want their bonus early for serving during the war. Hoover says no. Remember, he calls in the troops, and then he supposedly locked himself in the White House. And of course, we have these pitched battles fought back and forth between the Bonus Army veterans and troops. Of course, all of this broadcast to the country via photographs and being broadcast on the radio. And of course, he suffers majorly as a result. That takes us to the New Deal. Many of you folks love you some FDR, all right? What's up? Oh, all right, well, we never mentioned the fact that, oh, by the way, FDR was like a serial cheater, all righty? So apparently the whole wheelchair thing didn't prevent him from doing some stuff. He apparently found his way around the White House just fine. Anyways, then again, Eleanor had a long, supposedly we believe Eleanor had a long-term relationship as well with a woman, actually. Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting setup there. Anyways, the New Deal, FDR. Remember, he wins this election over Hoover convincingly. If you recall, one of the first things he does, and I know it's somewhere here, remember, he's responsible for ending Prohibition, right? So one of the very first things he does is he get 21st Amendment in there to overturn Prohibition so that Americans can go back to kind of drinking again. Part of this is because, remember, all of the organized crime and murders, right, that had occurred as a result. Roosevelt takes over. Remember, he forms the Brain Trust. That's his inner circle of advisors, experts that are designed to fix the problems of the New Deal. How is he elected? He's elected by bringing groups who previously had not supported the Democratic Party together, including working class Americans, blacks, and intellectual folks that had college degrees. During the first 3 years of his presidency, remember, we called that the first New Deal. After, really, he starts to get into his second term, that's more the second New Deal. Remember, the first New Deal, he focuses on relief programs first and then recovery. And then, of course, after those have started to have an impact, we're going to jump over to reform instead. The relief programs, Federal Emergency Relief Administration. That's a banking administration, by the way. That is well, I'll get to that in a moment. The CCC, employment. All right, remember, we're going to put people back to work in national parks and other locations to do jobs that need to be done, and we'll pay them for it. It was run by the military. The PWA and the WPA, the Public Works Administration and the Works Progress Administration, work programs, right? Putting people back to work in cities, doing common sort of city-urban jobs. That could be anything from repairs to roads to literally like sweeping the sidewalk. Any job that needed to be done, we want people back to work. Again, the government's going to employ them. The National Youth Administration, obviously specifically targeted young people, right? Because we do not want folks in high school and college to drop out to try to get a job to support their families. We'd like them to stay there and be rewarded with a job as well. All right, recovery programs. Remember, those are more medium term. Those are designed to get us back to where we were before the Depression hit. The National Recovery Administration, remember, businesses and labor leaders work together to come up with common codes, common decisions, so that prices would remain low, right, and production would be maintained. Remember, if you supported the NRA, you flew the Blue Eagle in your window. That was a sign to consumers, I'm doing what I can to help fight this depression. You should shop at my store instead of the other people that are not. All right? The AAA, remember, that's where we kill all the farm animals and we destroy the crops. Why? We want to eliminate that surplus. We want to try to bring those crop prices up. All right? The Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act. I'm sorry, I skipped over. I've jumped down. The Emergency Banking Relief Act. That is, if you remember, where we declare a banking holiday and we shut down every bank in this country, and then federal agents go into the bank. They make sure they have enough money, right, before they're allowed to open up again. And FDR, remember, using those fireside chats, is able to really convince the American public, hey, the banks that we are going to allow to open back up again, you can trust. They have the money to pay off their debts, and so if they open, you know they're a trustworthy, reliable bank that you can put your money in. All right? We do get taken off the gold standard during the Depression in an effort to try to essentially, he thought it would be a way actually to try to trigger inflation during this time. All right? Reform programs, these are the big ones. These are a lot of the ones that have the most impact and that are still around today. The TVA, remember, that's the one that builds the dams, the hydroelectric dams around the country in order to bring power to rural areas and also to prevent flooding and other natural disasters. All right, Social Security is the big one. Social Security, remember, disability insurance and insurance to folks at a retirement age because, of course, they tend to suffer more during tough times because they have less income because they're unable to work often. Wagner Act, National Labor Relations Act, that actually allowed labor unions to form without being broken up for the first time. It gave them the right to collectively bargain. It was considered to be a major victory for labor in this country. A reward from FDR for supporting him during those elections. FHA, home loans. FDIC, your money is guaranteed in the bank. All right, so you never have to worry about panics or runs to the bank anymore. Federal government's going to back up your money. All right. The SEC regulates the stock market. Why? Because of course there was a belief the stock market had lied to the American public and had contributed to the Great Crash and the Great Depression by taking in more and more of the public's money because of deception and lies about whether the economy was going to continue to grow. Rural electrification. We're going to bring electricity to rural areas. All right. Fair Labor Standards Act. Aid to families with dependent children, AFDC, that's our early version of welfare for families living under poverty with children. They can get assistance. Remember, there were critics of the New Deal. The American Liberty League are the conservatives. They think this is a bunch of socialism that needs to be stopped before we might as well just turn into a socialist country. Father Charles Coughlin, remember, criticizes FDR for not going far enough in nationalizing and taking over the banks. That's the dude, remember, who kind of goes crazy and starts shouting like, not shouting, but starts giving those anti-Semitic messages. Eventually he's taken off the air. Huey Long, remember, share our wealth. He's the politician in the Democratic Party from the South who's the biggest rival to Roosevelt. He actually thinks Roosevelt doesn't do enough. He believes in taking money from any family that has over a certain amount. He says if you have over $5 million, that's more than you'll ever need. We're going to take all your excess money, and then we're going to use it to give $5,000 to every family in this country that is underneath that number. All right? Obviously very popular with the working class. Obviously criticized by conservatives as essentially a communist. All right? Never happened, but he would have been a big rival to Roosevelt had he not been killed before the 1936 election. Francis Townsend is a doctor. What's going on? I don't know. Francis Townsend is the doctor, remember, who is the advocate for the elderly. He put so much pressure on Roosevelt that he's not doing enough to help the elderly, that eventually FDR relents. All right, please remember, the courts start to strike down some of FDR's policies. For instance, the NRA, the AAA were struck down by the courts. What does Roosevelt do in response? He gets angry, right, and he tries to pack the court, right? Remember the Judiciary Reorganization Act, he could add judges to the court so that there would be a majority that would be loyal or supportive of his policies, right? Remember, he's blocked by Congress, the public was strongly opposed to it, they viewed it as FDR going too far and abusing his role as president. Why does the New Deal end? Well, first off, remember, FDR thinks the Depression is ending early and he stops funding some of those programs. We sink back down into a recession at the end of the 30s. And of course, by the end of that decade, large numbers of Republicans have been voted into Congress because of that recession. And they combine with Dixiecrats, Southern Democrats, to start to block New Deal programs in Congress. All right? The real reason, of course, why we switched from the New Deal over to other issues is for the war and growing concern about what's happening internationally. The war ends up being the real solution to the New Deal for us because it's responsible for actually ending the policies of the Depression. All right, again, just a little laundry list of the laws, all of which I've already mentioned with the exception of the one at the bottom. Please don't forget about the Indian New Deal, as it's called. It's called the Indian Reorganization Act. What it did was it officially ended the Dawes Severalty Act, and it allowed Native American tribes to return to their native lands, to own their native lands, and to be able to practice their culture, customs, religions, languages freely. All right? Last topic we're on today is the road to World War II. Please recall, we were very isolationist in the 20s. Normalcy, remember, is our isolationism of the 20s, very popular. We didn't sign Versailles, we didn't join the League. Remember, instead what we did is we signed a bunch of paper agreements that looked good on paper, but it weren't actually worth the ink on the page because nobody would actually enforce them, right? Washington Disarmament Conference, remember? We signed that deal where we signed the Five-Power Treaty where we limited the number of battleships that other countries had, gave us a false sense of security, made us think we were going to have the strongest military, especially Navy, compared to these other countries. That ended up not being the case. The Kellogg-Briand Pact, you're back. The Kellogg-Briand Pact outlawed war, made it illegal for a country to declare war except for defensive purposes. It never lasted. The Dawes Plan, remember, we renegotiate the debts from Europe, from Germany to Britain and France, so that Britain and France can pay us back the payments we need from World War I. Economic isolationism, remember, we raise our tariffs and put them through the roof to isolate ourselves from trade with Europe to benefit American businesses. In 22, we created the highest peacetime tariff up to that point in American history, the Ford-Niebuhr tariff. And then after the Depression, we followed it up with the new highest tariff in American history, the Hawley-Smoot tariff. We refused to forgive European debts, even though Europe was collapsing under the payment systems that they were under. Remember, FDR refused to participate in the London Economic Conference because he thought we were being forced to make economic decisions by Europe that he disagreed with. Into the 30s, remember the Hoover-Stimson Doctrine. After Japan invades Manchuria, we do nothing except basically say we won't recognize that that belongs to you. The Nye Committee, remember, was the committee that said, hey, we had been lied to during World War I. We had been forced into the war, and Wilson had lied to us. We were forced in by those arms manufacturers. We can't have that happen again. We need to avoid doing the same thing in World War II. Neutrality Acts of 35, 36, 37 kept FDR from becoming more active in the conflict, even though he probably was inching towards that already. If you recall, we would pass a new Neutrality Act every year, every time a new conflict broke out around the world. All right. There was the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 35. All right. We have the Spanish Civil War. We have the Spanish Civil War in 36, and we have the Japanese invasion of China in 37. Each time one of those incidents happened, the U.S. just declared a new Neutrality Act. All right? Remember, they said we couldn't sell weapons, we couldn't ride on the ships of a country at war, we couldn't interfere in other countries' affairs like the Spanish Civil War, so Spain falls to fascism. Because the U.S. and other republics did not do anything to help them. Yeah? We technically don't start the Japanese internment camps until we're in the war, until we actually, after Pearl Harbor. It's an effect of the Pearl Harbor attack. Okay? Hey, remember, Americans, FDR gives a quarantine speech which says we need to quarantine aggressive dictatorships around the world. The American public hates it. He stops using that sort of rhetoric. We want out of China after the Panay incident, remember, where our ship gets attacked by the Japanese, and the American public actually blamed us for having the ship there in the first place. Remember the America First Committee, Lindbergh's committee, if you recall. The Isolationist Committee was able to convince the American public and politicians isolationism was still the best solution. Good neighbor policy, that becomes our new policy in Latin America. We finally reject the imperialism under those previous presidents. We withdraw from a lot of those areas. We no longer intervene. We argue that no country now has the right to intervene in the internal affairs of another after we had just done that for like the last 30 years. All right? We also declared during the 30s that we would now mutually enforce the Monroe Doctrine, that it was not just our policy, it was all of the Western Hemisphere's policy together. Why do we end neutrality? Well, because FDR wants us to push more towards supporting the Allies as the war goes on, as the situation gets more desperate for the Allies. The Neutrality Act of 39, remember? It did allow democracies to buy weapons from the U.S., but only on a cash and carry basis. All right, remember, they got to pick them up, they got to pay cash. We're not going to let them on credit or anything like that. The Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies tried to push more Americans towards direct involvement. They worked actively against the America First Committee. All right? Destroyer for Bases deal. We're seeing FDR become more involved, even though the American public is still hesitant. We sell destroyers to Japan for naval bases around the world. Then his Arsenal of Democracy speech. Remember, we need to be the great warehouse to supply the other allies, like England and France. After France falls, he says, hey, there are 4 freedoms that we all must fight for. And he uses that to convince Congress to pass the Lend-Lease Act. Remember, Lend-Lease is the biggest reason why the Allies win the war. We begin to supply England, later the Soviet Union, with goods. We loan them to them, we give them to them, we worry about them paying us back later. So now we're actively sending products to the Allies and only the Allies, even though we're not in the war yet. Yeah?
The 4 reasons.
The 4 freedoms? Freedom of speech, freedom of faith or religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. All right, yeah. So kind of general sort of. I mean, speech isn't general, right? Worship isn't general, but freedom from want. Good luck with that. Alrighty. Anyways, the Atlantic Charter is one other thing you need to remember. That's where Churchill and FDR agree on the boat in the Atlantic Ocean, right? They agree, hey, we're going to create a international organization after the war. That's going to become the UN, and that they would, when they won, they would not redo the boundaries or take any of the territory they gained for themselves. All right. Of course, we know what officially ends U.S. neutrality. It's the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Of course, we know why the Japanese did it, because we had just cut off oil to them because of their aggression in the Pacific. All right. Major battles. I don't know how much we really need to know from the major battle portion, to be honest with you. Midway is the turning point in the Pacific. After that, Japan can only fight a defensive war from then on. Right? Stalingrad is the turning point in Europe. After that, the Germans can only fight a defensive war. Right? What role does the Americans play in that? Well, remember, we did invade North Africa. We take North Africa back. Then, of course, we invade Italy. We take back most of Italy as well. And then, obviously, the major American involvement in the war is D-Day. That's the invasion of France at Normandy, which is an area along the coast. It creates a second front, a Western front, right? And from that point forward, the Allies in the West and in the East, right, close in on the Germans, on the Nazis. All right? You need to know Iwo Jima and Okinawa. I think you guys are probably good with those, right? Those are the places we dropped the atomic bombs. Remember the atomic program, the Manhattan Project. Of course, the war ends a few days later after those bombs.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
What's that, bud?
Is it Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
It is Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
You said Iwo Jima and Okinawa, that's where we dropped the
Oh, no. Iwo Jima and Okinawa are our final battles before we drop the bomb. Sorry, thank you, bud.
Did you say it
All right.
was Hiroshima?
It is Hiroshima, yeah. But Hiroshima's fine, alrighty. Anyways, I don't judge people for saying Hiroshima, alright? People tried to judge me when I said Hiroshima, and I was like, hey, that's actually how it
I
is.
didn't
Alright?
judge
Yo!
you.
No! Alright? Who's there? Alright. Wartime diplomacy during the war. Why'd you have to do that? Wartime diplomacy during the war. We have 3 major conferences that help us to negotiate an end to the war. First, Tehran. We promised to open that second front during the war. Stalin pledges to invade Japan 3 months after Germany is defeated. Yalta is when we decide, hey, after the war is over, we're going to divide up Germany and Europe until they're able to have elections to reunite again. Potsdam is the last warning we give to Japan before we drop the bomb on them. The bombs on them. Yes. All right. Oh, World War II at home. All righty. No, World War II at home. All right. Suck it up, buttercups. All right. Hey. At the end of the Great Depression, obviously the war ends, Great Depression, we know that, all right? In addition to that, we mobilize for the war, right? The Selective Service mobilizes the military, right? We create this fighting force of citizen civilian soldiers. The Office of Wartime Management, the OWM, manages research and development, all right? It leads to the development of new technologies like the atomic bomb. The OPA, the Office of Price Administration, they're the ones that developed the rationing program. Remember, key goods like oil, tires, even things like eggs and bread were rationed, which meant you got a little slip of paper that said you only got a certain amount each month. All right? Women join the armed forces. Remember the WACs, the WAVES, the WAFs, alrighty? Women's Air Corps, right? Remember women serving in the Navy as well. Industry, remember Rosie the Riveter, right? Representing all of the incredible work that women do to help us win that war at home. African Americans become organized during the war. More of them working in wartime industries. A. Philip Randolph, civil rights leader, right? Demands of President Truman. First FDR, I should say, then Truman, right? Remember, we want desegregation of the military, of defense industries. We want more opportunities to help win the war. He threatens a march on Washington. Ultimately, when Roosevelt goes ahead and issues the FEPC, the Fair Employment Practices Commission, he calls off the march. Hey, Mexican immigration skyrockets during the war thanks to the Bracero program that provided key workers in agriculture and other areas when we needed them during the war. Internment of Japanese, right? We can't forget about that. The internment of the Japanese. Obviously, one of the great tragedies in American history. Race riots against blacks after the war in some places. The Zoot Suit riots in LA, remember, between service members and Hispanic Latino men. Native Americans support the war effort. Remember the Navajo Code Talkers, for instance, that sent secret messages that could not be intercepted. Union, the War Labor Board emerges during the war. In order to prevent strikes from breaking out. It's very successful, unlike World War I. Movement starts to occur from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt during this era. Of course, we know the effects of the war, loss of life, but very minimal damage to the United States.
Russia had the most, right?
They did. Now, hey, got to be careful when you look at their numbers. When the Russians list their casualties for World War II, they include civilian casualties as well. And that's why their numbers are so extreme. In their defense, a lot of those folks were wiped out by the Germans as the Germans moved across the Soviet Union. All right. Guys,
Bye.
we're done for the day. All right. Well, we're not done for the day. We're done with the notes for the day. All righty. All right, Jasmine looks like she's done for the day. All right, let's take some practice questions. Mr. M is a kind-hearted soul. I only have 20 for you today. All right, so only 20. All right. Notes? All right, now if you need the packet we just went over, there should be some more in the packet. All right. All right. Sadio.
At least put the 7 wrong, I'll be happy.
Did you guys get practical choice? Huh? No, I'm gonna be there for sure. Promise is a promise. Alright, friends. 20 questions, 20 minutes. Alright.